have the one and only Carlie Webb Palmer on, or Carlie Palmer-Webb. Oh my gosh. I
Yep.
got that. I'm so excited. I can't even get it out. Blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Well, yeah, it's all the same. I have the amazing Carlie Palmer-Webb, the one and only Christian sex educator. Welcome. Words are escaping me today. What the heck? Christian sex educator. I'm not even going to edit
Nailed
it
it.
out.
I love it.
Boom. Done. Welcome, Carlie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
It's been a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
But God's timing is so perfect because I reached out to you in the fall of last year to talk about this. And that was when I was like Jonah and like, hold up, God, I got a really good idea and I'm running. And the conversation would have been great then, but the timing was not right for you. It didn't work out. We touched base. And then one thing led to another. And here we are. We're going to do it today.
I'm so glad we made it.
I know. It feels like a huge accomplishment. Well, I am over here fangirling, but other people might not know who you are. There's probably like one. So for her, let her know a little bit about you.
I'm sure there are way more than just one.
Maybe whatever.
Well, I'm just a normal human who decided to talk about this just like you. But like you said, my name's Carlie. I am a Christian sex researcher and educator. I started primarily in the research space, and my plan was to go to grad school and then become a professor who taught healthy sexuality courses. But in grad school and after, I was like, ooh, research. I don't love research as much as I do education. And so I decided to just focus on education instead of the research side, though I still do a little bit of research here and there. And my goal is to provide shame-free sex ed for Christians in every life stage. We're still working on getting the products out for every life stage, but I'm covering a lot of them so far and could not be happier that this is where my life ended up.
That is absolutely amazing. Because I know at 5 years old, somebody's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're like, I want to be the Christian sex educator.
Right. Never.
Not at all. Do you remember ever like flipping through the TV and Dr. Ruth would come on? And I remember it was like an adult would like run for the clicker and be like, turn it quick. And I'd just be like, that's so weird. Like, why is this older woman talking about sex? Like, that's so weird.
Yeah, I was wildly sheltered. Adore my parents. Let me just say that. And I was incredibly sheltered. So there was no thought that even being a sex educator was a career, let alone a career that I would end up in.
I love it. And I love though how you followed the Lord's leading in all of this. What was your undergrad in?
Human development.
Okay. And so from there, the spark happened? Like what?
Yeah,
what led you to
I
this?
took a couple of classes during my undergraduate program focused on sexuality. And I was like, hold up, I actually really like this. And also, I had no idea how lacking my education had been. And I was waiting for marriage. So I had very little sexual experience, but recognizing in my undergrad just how little I had learned about sex was kind of sparked the initial interest in this as a field of study. And then by the time I started graduate school, I knew that healthy sexuality was what I wanted to focus on. And so I did human development. Well, I did marriage, family, and human development was what the program was called, with a research emphasis on healthy sexuality for graduate school.
Amazing. And I love that you just like, I have a lot of questions. One is I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when you came home and your parents are like, so what is it? What's the, like, how did you like get that out? Were they like, oh my gosh.
I wish that I remembered that conversation better.
You blocked it out. You're like,
But
nope.
I think it was just such a gradual discovery for me across several years that I think my parents just got little bits of it at a time. It wasn't like, okay, mom and dad, this is what I'm going to do. Until after graduate school, I was working full time as a researcher, trying to decide if I wanted to go on and get my PhD. And I was doing gender and sexuality research and just, again, was not loving the research piece. And so I did have the conversation of, hey, mom and dad, I think I'm going to start an Instagram account to do sex education. And to my parents' credit, They're incredibly supportive. Not always comfortable, but incredibly supportive, which I appreciate.
No, we need that. And, they're struggling with understanding all of this. If they've come from a point where they're like, okay, we're not talking about this. I love that they were at least supportive of that.
Very much so.
That's huge. And that gives you the freedom to be like, okay, like I can like walk fully in this, which then leads to exactly why you're doing what you're doing and what I'm doing is that it shouldn't be this weird conversation. Like God created our bodies. Why are we even like, oh my gosh, how am I going to say this?
I know.
But that's what we feel like.
Definitely. And I think that's a culture that's been created across centuries,
Yeah.
And we're just starting as a Christian community to kind of come out of it. But for those of us who are on the cusp of, we are learning now as adults that we should be approaching sex differently, but we grew up learning nothing, or maybe learning sinful, dirty, don't think about it, don't look at it,
Yeah.
Only that was our whole sex education. We're recognizing, okay, we need to do this differently, but we also experienced the shame side. So generations after us, like our kids, will hopefully be much better off and won't have all this shame to work through as adults. But for those of us who are in the middle, there's a lot of work that has to be done to let go of the sexual shame that we've developed across our lives.
Yeah. And I think the biggest aha moment for me was I wasn't sexually abused. I was a virgin when I got married. I didn't do a lot of those things that you might go, well, of course you're going to have some trauma, you're going to have some misunderstandings because these different things. So when I listened to a podcast like 2.5 years ago, that was me. It was a good girl who struggled with sex in her marriage. I was like, oh my goodness, like it's a thing.
There's
It's
more
like
of us.
there's more of us. There's more of us. And like I didn't realize that there was like I was welcome in the club. Like you're allowed to because you've misunderstood it because you just haven't been taught.
Right. Right. And it feels like nobody else is talking about this, which means probably nobody else is struggling like I am. And there's just something wrong with me because I should be having a good time and I'm not.
1,000%.
Mhm.
1,000%. And you feel like I don't know. I felt like my husband knew more about it. He hadn't had any sex, but for some reason, I think culturally that men just understand it.
I also think that part of that is even for men who don't have personal sexual experience, they are not as discouraged sexually as women are. So virginity is pushed a lot harder for women than it is for men in Christian culture. And they were probably a part of more sexual conversations, for good or for bad, growing up than women were. So I do think that it's very likely that he was exposed to more sexual content and conversations than you were, and exposed to fewer conversations about how important your virtue and purity and virginity were. And that's a big deal because there's less sexual shame and more sexual knowledge oftentimes for men. That's not always the case, but on average, that's what we see.
Wow, that's really true. That's so good. Okay, friend, let's like rip this band-aid off. What is one of because that's what we do here. What is one of like the top things that you're like, okay, I wish this is the band-aid that I would just love to rip off right now?
So many.
Where to start?
The first thing that comes to mind is the myth that sex by creation, that sex from the beginning was intended to be for the pleasure of men primarily. That is something that is perpetuated in broader culture too, but within Christianity, there's been messages offered to us for generations. It's not just recent that sex is primarily for the enjoyment of men and that women are to show up in their marriage, to show up and please their husband and be present sexually, but it's a way that we serve and love our spouse. And that isn't true in reverse. And I think that's one major thing one major mental shift that we need to make, especially as Christian women, that yes, we actually can serve and love our husbands through sex and God also created our bodies with the capacity for immense sexual pleasure, and sex should be equally enjoyable for us as it is for our spouse. And it should be something that's connecting, that's full of love, that's joyful and exciting for both people, not something that we are just offering as a service, though it obviously can be a way that we express love to our spouse.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. All of it. I think what blew my mind was when I realized how many, not pleasure points, but how tender and sensitive female genitalia is,
Mhm.
far more than male.
Yeah.
I had this moment where I was like, okay, wait a second. Just like I look at a painting and I don't see deeper than that. Like I'm like, oh, there's red on there. He liked the color red. I don't see anger or anything like that. So I'm like, okay, let me just like surface level here. If God created female bodies, so we know God created Adam and Eve, I don't see anywhere after the fall that there is a 2.0 version of Eve. I mean, unless I've missed something, but everyone I've talked to, we agree. Eve was made, sin, Eve is, everything's still the same. So if God made her with this tender, sensitive points to be only for pleasure, then he did that for us too. And since he doesn't make any accidents and everything he does is very purposeful, then I am created to enjoy and have pleasure.
And
Blew
he
my
called
mind.
it good.
And
Yeah.
he called it good.
And not only is the female body very sensitive and the clitoris has more nerve endings than the head of the penis, that's true, but also women are capable of consecutive orgasms in one sexual encounter. So comparing who can enjoy more sexual pleasure may not be necessary. But if we were to do that, women would
Hypothetically.
come out on top. The capacity for pleasure in the female body that's built into our creation is really incredible. And it seems quite obvious to me now, and to you too, at this stage in your journey, that that was a very purposeful part of our creation, and that sex was intended to be enjoyed by all people from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's amazing to me because we think of, I don't know, it's so easy to think that God's this fun killer, oh, he only wants you to have sex with one person for the rest of your life. No, he designed it so beautifully and he wants it to be enjoyable and pleasurable and this connection that only you two get to enjoy. He's not a
And
fun
it's
killer.
awesome.
And it's awesome. And it really is. And there's just that sweetness when only the two of you can enjoy this together.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
something so beautiful about that. And no, I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. It's something that is such a big lie. And it's so perpetuated in every community. And I don't think it's meant to be,
Yeah.
but it's also in a lot of like nonverbals that are, even like you said, like men are oftentimes exposed to more sexual information than women are. And we're kind of like, no, I've gotten to the point now where I'm like, well, if you and your husband agree on it and, you want to put a stripper pole in your room, I think it makes it for a really weird house tour, but go for it. Like,
Do your thing.
do your thing. Like the two of you, I mean, I'm not going to put one in, but no, I love that. What's another lie that you're like, okay, I've had it. This is enough.
I think that we are not sexual beings until we get married is a big one for Christians. That waiting until marriage to have sex means that we have to shut off this part of ourselves and ignore it as if it shouldn't exist before we get married. And that's coming from someone who I actually am on the side. This is rare for sex educators, but I'm in the camp of even most solo play or masturbation doesn't totally align with my beliefs about God's purposes for sex. So I'm not saying to live in your sexuality in a way that doesn't align with your values. What I am saying is that God created us with the capacity for sexual connection and pleasure from birth actually, which I know that's weird to think about sometimes.
Right.
We'll skip that, the young part. As we're growing into our teenage years and our adult years, our sexuality is a part of who we are, and it's not something that has an off switch. That's not how we were created. And so we need to be learning about and working to manage our sexuality and celebrate our sexuality, embrace our sexuality in every stage of our life, even if we are not sexually active in that stage. And I think doing so can eliminate a lot of the sexual shame that Christians and other highly religious or previously highly religious individuals experience around sexuality, because so much of that shame comes from thinking that your sexuality should be turned off in a certain stage and having that not work out, which makes sense because there is no off switch. So when they experience any level of desire, when they're kissing their significant other and they start to feel like they want to go a little bit further than their values would, encourage, then they feel like, oh, shoot, I'm a terrible person because I'm not supposed to think about sex. I'm not supposed to want sex because right now I'm not having sex. And that's just not the case.
I love that. Okay, so I have two questions. I want to go back to masturbation in just a
Okay.
second, because that is a question that I have gotten multiple times, and I'm like, I don't know fully how to put my words around that, but I know that that's one. But the second is, and let's start with this one and then let's go into that. How do we, as Christian women, embrace our sexuality without it? Because I can envision, okay, well, I'm a sexual being and I'm going to do this. So there's this leap to being very provocatively dressed, maybe. And so, how do we embrace what God has created in us as sexual beings without, I don't know, being inappropriate? Like, what is the appropriate way to do that?
Well, I think every person will have to determine that somewhat for themselves. But I would provide the example of embracing any other gift that God has given us as a way to determine what the correct or best way to embrace our sexuality would be. So, for example, I feel like something God has offered me is the ability to teach. That's a gift that I feel like he's given me. It's something that I can practice, obviously, but it's something that I feel like has been with me for a long time. So if I'm going to embrace this gift that I feel like has come from God, I will do things like expressing gratitude to him for that gift and telling him how glad I am that I have it. I will celebrate the fact that that's a part of who I am, even if I'm not currently in the act of teaching. It's certainly not something that I will be ashamed of, but I will also use it to bless others in whatever way I feel like aligns with God's purposes for my life and my personal beliefs and values. So when it comes to sexuality, we can kind of practice these same things. We can say, okay, how can I embrace this gift that God has given me? I can express gratitude to him for creating me with the capacity to connect through sex, with the ability to experience sexual pleasure. And even as a single person or someone who isn't married who wants to save sex for marriage, you can recognize that your sexual desires are drawing you to other people. And you can say, God, I'm so glad that I'm really attracted to this person that I'm dating and that I'm interested in having sex with them, because that's a really important part of pulling the two of you together. So gratitude is a big piece. I think learning about your sexuality and trying to understand your physical and spiritual creation around sexuality, trying to understand what a healthy sexual relationship can look like, is a part of embracing it. And I will say, I don't think that embracing our sexuality actually has anything to do with showing other people that we are sexual beings. And I do think that post-sexual revolution, there's this idea that sexual freedom looks like flaunting our sexuality. And for some people, that feels really genuine and it aligns with their values. But I don't think that it even needs to be tied to it, right? Like, a part of me embracing the gift that I have to teach doesn't include me telling everybody that I meet how awesome of a teacher that I am, even though I do think I'm a good teacher. It doesn't have to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I think that we can fully embrace and celebrate our sexuality and still live the concepts of modesty and privacy and focusing outward and loving our neighbor we can live all of those fully at the same time. They're not in conflict, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I always love to take kind of an abstract thought and put it into something that's more mainstream and something that we would think, of course, you're gifted at teaching. You want to show the Lord and thank the Lord for what he has skilled you with. And same thing, appreciating what God has created. I mean, you've had a baby, I've had babies. Like, you don't have to be pregnant very long to be like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And then you give birth.
Miraculous.
It totally is. I remember my first pregnancy being like, wait a second, like having a baby is like insane. But the fact that you can get from conception to live birth, that's such a miracle. And of course we would say, thank you, Lord, for like that is amazing. And to have gratitude towards that totally makes sense. Okay.
I
So
also think,
okay.
can I just also mention, I think it's important to recognize that sexual joy is something that we experience and can experience in ways that align with our values outside of marriage. Even little things like when I was dating my husband, that man is gorgeous and such an incredible human. And I was so attracted to him and still am. But in the dating phase, that's like all of the butterflies and like wanting to be with them constantly is a part of our sexual creation. And that's really exciting. And it's good that it's that exciting. If we didn't have sexual desire, the capacity for sexual arousal, we wouldn't get to experience as much of that twitterpation. I'm not saying it's all sexual, obviously, but so much of the joy that we experience in dating relationships is because of our sexual creation. And that part of us is really good. And I think is a very purposeful part of who we are. So that's part of embracing it as well, I think.
Absolutely. Well, and also remembering that sex, the act of sex, is just one part of being a sexual being and intimacy. You know, it's really easy to think that intimacy and sex are synonyms, that they are the same thing, and they're not.
They're
Sex
not.
is a part of intimacy, and there's so much there. And like you say, like the fact that like sex is the cherry on top of all of that, after it's the crescendo, after the buildup of all
Totally.
of those things. And I had a friend who, she was dating a guy for a while, and her parents were like, I just don't know if this is the right guy. And finally her dad took her out to lunch one day and was like, can you imagine having sex with him? And she was like, oh my gosh. But she's so glad he asked her, because she was like, no,
Yeah.
I can't. And I think it's so important that we consider that.
Yes, definitely. And I think that we've done a disservice to Christians who are dating, or to those of us who dated at some point, to expect a shut off of sexuality in that stage. Actually would celebrate a relationship like the one you're describing between your friend and her previous significant other. She probably felt like, oh, we're doing a really good job. Like, I'm not even feeling tempted, you know?
This is great. I am so godly. I don't even want to be near you. It's great. This is great.
If you don't want to have sex with your significant other, then one of two things is likely happening. Either you're not attracted to them in a way that will be really important in your marriage, or two, there's some level of trauma or shame that's getting in the way of you experiencing desire.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
should want them. You really should.
You really
It's
should. Well,
important.
and flip it around. Like, don't you want him to want you?
Yes, of course.
Like, you don't want to just
That
be like,
should be a good thing.
it's
And
just,
it's not lustful. I think we're
yeah.
so afraid of lusting because we've been counseled not to lust, to avoid lust, that we avoid anything that we think might fall into that category. But sexual desire and lust are distinct. They're not the same thing. And sexual desire is a good thing. And lust is taking sexual desire and turning it into selfish behavior, getting pleasure or enjoyment from the use of someone else without connection and consent. Tying lust and sexual desire together as synonyms is one of the things that gets in the way of embracing our sexuality and understanding it without shame as Christians.
Which is such a I keep hitting on this. When you misunderstand and misdefine what God has spoken and what he said and what his word says, when you make leaps that he never intended, you are always going to get errant theology. You are always going to get it wrong. And that trajectory might be off just a little bit, and you keep going and keep going. And now you're like, wait a second, I can't even want to have sex with my husband. That's where
Right.
I'm at now.
Right.
That's not what God said
No.
at all. At all. Okay, let's tackle this big one and we'll end on this, even though I want to talk to you for hours and hours. But let's touch on this last one of masturbation. That's like it's like a 4-letter word in a Christian home. Like, you don't say that at all. I feel like we're very aligned on this. I do believe that God created sex as a team sport. It's between two people, and it's not to be an isolated event. But I would love your wisdom on this.
Well, I'll share a few things. The first one that I want to be clear about is that you and I have created this belief about masturbation based on our understanding of God's purposes for sex. But masturbation isn't directly addressed in the Bible. So there are a lot of Christians, and I want to acknowledge this, who are good and who are dedicated to following Christ, who believe that masturbation is an appropriate way to manage desire while single. And I want to acknowledge that it is possible that either of these options is in line with God's purposes for sex. It doesn't align with my understanding of his purposes, but because it's not addressed directly, we are all trying to come to the conclusion that aligns best with our beliefs. So I want to acknowledge that initially.
I love that clarification. Absolutely.
I will say, I have spent a lot of years trying to really shed the shame that I had surrounding the idea of masturbation to make sure that my beliefs about it aligned with truth and weren't coming from a place of shame. So where I've landed is, it sounds like similar to where you've landed, Michelle, is that God intended sex to be a relational experience, and that connection is a really integral part of what sex is intended to be. And never can it be as meaningful or as joyful or as pleasurable as it can be between two people who are fully in love and fully committed to each other. Now, I will say, masturbation is 100% something that should be talked about in homes. It can't be treated, even if we believe that it doesn't align with God's purposes for sex. It has to be something that's discussed, and it needs to be something that's discussed as nuanced. So if you're a parent that wants to teach your children to avoid masturbation for the most part, you need to understand a couple of things. One, young kids are going to touch their private parts. Young kids are capable of sexual pleasure, but young kids are not having a sexual experience masturbating in the way that we imagine it, because they have no sexual context. So I hear from Christian parents all the time, because of my job, who are really, really worried because their toddler is rubbing their genitals on a pillow when they go to bed, or because their toddler is constantly touching their penis, or they just can tell that their toddler is experiencing pleasure from touching their genitals. And they feel like, I don't know how to teach my 2 or 3-year-old not to masturbate. And bless their hearts, I totally understand where they're coming from based on the education that most of us received, or the complete lack thereof.
Right.
Your toddlers are not having a sexual experience in the way that we imagine it. So there are really normal developmental behaviors. Touching your genitals as a young kid is one of them, that need to be completely released from shame and completely released from our sexual context. Your toddler is not thinking about sexual things. They're thinking, this kind of tickles. I like this. That's all they're thinking. Okay. And that's totally normal behavior. As our children grow into their preteen years and teen years, there will also likely be some self-exploration for every single person, or at least the large majority. And I'm not talking about a habit of masturbating to orgasm consistently. I'm talking about they're washing their bodies and they're realizing, oh, this actually really feels good. And maybe you have a son who experiences orgasm for the first time when he's 12 in the shower and he's like, I actually didn't know what this was and I didn't mean to do this. And is this okay? But if he feels like that's something that's off limits to talk to you about, then that's when we can see those kinds of behaviors that are totally normal and should not be shamed transition into consistent habits across a long period of time. And for a lot of people, those consistent habits across a long period of time are viewed as being totally healthy and totally okay. For me, that wouldn't align totally with my beliefs. And so I would want to address that differently. But still, it needs to be something that we can release from shame.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep going.
Go for it. I'm here for it. Keep going.
I also want to say that within a married relationship, oftentimes women who have grown up with no education and no sexual experience don't know what feels good to them. So there are also situations where, as an educator and a Christian, I would feel totally comfortable directing someone, and I would feel comfortable doing it myself, saying, okay, actually, what I want you to do is I want you to go get in the bath and I want you to touch yourself and see if you can feel what types of touch feel good to you and what types of touch are uncomfortable. And then bring your spouse in and show them what you're doing so that you can enjoy that together. I do think that self-exploration is an important tool for a lot of couples who haven't had the education to understand how sex can be pleasurable, especially for women. All of that is to say, our approach to masturbation, the way that we talk about it with our kids and the way that we approach it within marriage, I think needs to be nuanced. And I think it needs to be in all contexts separated from shame, even if we believe that sex should be a relational experience. That was long, but there you go.
Well, I love it because it's not a simple answer. And I love how you started it. Like, there's nowhere in the Bible that says masturbation is right, masturbation is wrong. So we're going to struggle through that. And we have to take what we know to be true about sex, that it is relational. And I think all of it comes back to, what is your heart motivation? If you're going into the bathtub to kind of figure out and have that exploration, is your motivation to pleasure yourself in isolation from your husband? Well, I think that's something that you need to take before the Lord and really search your heart over. If this is yeah, I want to figure this out, and, call your husband, or maybe your husband's there the whole time. I don't know, but I agree.
Which is a great option too.
Which is a great option. And I'm pretty sure every husband would be like, I'm there. I will. Yes.
Show me.
Right? Exactly. If I must, whatever. But because it is supposed to be that relational, that a relationship, the two of you, and what is your heart behind it all, which is always what it comes back to.
I have to mention one more thing too. Vibrators fall into this category too. I talk, occasionally about vibrators on my social media accounts, and I always get responses that are like, wait, vibrators are used for masturbation, and I've heard you say that you don't totally agree with masturbation being used as solo play, so what's the deal here? And I'm like, hold up here.
Listen to my words.
I am all for using tools, positions, anything, pillows, whatever you need to do to make your sexual relationship in marriage pleasurable, meaningful, connecting for both of you, vibrators included. And vibrators can absolutely be used during a sexual encounter with your spouse in a way that increases pleasure and meaning for both of you. And I'm here for it. That doesn't mean that using vibrators has to align with your beliefs. But for me, I'm like, yes, again, go back to the heart of it. Why is it being used? And are you using it to replace your spouse? And are you using it a ton on your own because you want to avoid sex with your spouse? Or are you using it as a supplement to a sexual relationship that you love? In which case, do your thing, girl.
get that stripper pole, go for it, whatever. I love that. Absolutely, 1,000%. And here's the thing, the Bible doesn't talk about driving cars. The Bible doesn't talk about cell phones. We have to use discernment and wisdom. And we take so many things to the Lord in prayer. Are you taking your relationship and your sexual relationship with your spouse to the Lord in prayer? It's a
Yes.
novel idea to some people, but
Yes.
pray about it. Ask him.
Well, I think one of the reasons it feels like a novel idea for a lot of us is because we have so much sexual shame. And it feels like I can't talk to God about sex because God is holy and sex is dirty, right? So if obviously we don't believe that, or we wouldn't be
Yep.
having this
Right?
conversation.
Exactly.
But somewhere in my belief system, there's still some remnants. Even after all the years of work that I've put in to let go of sexual shame, there's still some remnants of that. It takes time and purposeful effort and education to separate God's view of sex from the things that are awful. Sex can be used for awful things. We all know that. Some of us have experienced it. And so it feels weird talking to God about something that we have been taught is dirty, and we might have experienced some really awful things having to do with sex. So if you feel like, I don't know if I can talk to God about my sex life, then I would say, okay, then let's start by recognizing there's some sexual shame there, and how can we work on that so that we can get to the point where talking to God about sex feels like the most natural thing in the world, because it was his idea and we would love his input.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have to know, what do we know about Satan? He has one agenda, and it is to pull you away from the truth of God's word all day, every day. And the biggest way that he can do that is in the family and in the home, and destroy relationships. And the greatest way he can do that between a husband and a wife is between intimacy. And so if he can distort our understanding of what God has said is true and right and holy, he will do it every day. We are under attack. We're under attack in our bedrooms. We're under attack in every possible way. And as I told my husband before I started this podcast, I said, we as believers, we have a target on our back. As a couple, as married, we have a target on our back. Now that I've done this, like, this target just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And Satan's like, yes, I love this. I want to get after this. I want to destroy everything.
Yeah. But as always, we can remember, okay, but who's more powerful?
Yep.
The one who told us that sex is good, that our bodies are good, that sex was intended for our pleasure and enjoyment and joy. He's so much more powerful, so much bigger, so much greater. So we don't have to feel like Satan has power over our sexual relationship. Would he like to? Sure. But God is so much bigger than him. And we can enjoy the full joy and compassion and connection and pleasure that sex from God has to offer us, without feeling like I never will be able to because Satan is attacking this. I'm not saying that he doesn't want to ruin it. I'm just saying, I think that sometimes when we feel like we're under attack, we lose our hope for what it can be. And we feel like, well, this is too hard. This is too hard to make good. So I'm just going to not.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, I love that. You are absolutely right. And we could talk for hours and hours here. But friend, you have so many amazing resources that hit to so many of these different things. Can you tell everyone where to find you and direct them there?
Yes. So everything that you want to find is on my website, thechristiansexeducator.com. My Instagram is the Christian Sex Educator. And on my website, you can find resources for parents to teach their kids. You can find resources for single Christians, engaged Christians, and married Christians.
I love that you touch on all of those levels, because when you go to your website, whatever your resources are, it asks, where are you? Like, which stage of life are you at?
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely love what you're doing. Thank you so much, Carlie, for coming on
Thank you
today.
so much for having me. I'm always thrilled to learn about people who are trying to create goodness and offer truth in this same space. So I'm thrilled to be here with you. Thank you.
It was a highlight of my week.